Joe Becker.
Here.
Peter Blussenbach.
Here.
Scott Gergen.
Here.
Lisa Hadid.
Here.
Dave Pemble.
Here.
Russ Roloff. Here. Kelsey Wades.
Here.
Hey.
Superintendent Collins.
Oh, Superintendent Collins.
There.
All right, thank you, Russ. Could I get a motion and a second to approve the agenda?
So moved. Second.
Is there any discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. Motion carries. Could I get a motion and a second to approve the minutes of the December 13th regular board meeting and the January 3rd organizational board meeting?
Motion. Second.
Thank you. Is there any discussion? All right, all those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. Motion carries. Could I get a motion to approve the bills payable and a second?
I move that we pay the bills.
Second.
Thank you. I think that's a responsible thing to do. Is there any discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. Motion carries. Could I get a motion to approve accepting the charitable donations for the second quarter of 2017-2018?
To make that motion.
Thank you, Joe. Thank you, Kelsey. Is there any discussion?
Thank you as
I was going to say, this is when Scott says thank you.
Thank you as always.
Yeah, very generous, very generous. Any further discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. Motion carries. And our last immediate action item is a motion to accept the quarterly review of student activities. Could I get a motion and a second?
Motion. Second.
Thank you. Is there any discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. All right, time for the good news.
Jennifer Herber, come on up.
Just saying, we've never had that response.
I apologize for those of you who have to stare at my fat butt, but this is how it goes. But wow, congratulate. We've never had this much of a turnout to acknowledge the Educator of the Year. How special for you. But because we're on television, the board wanted to invite Jennifer. What a year it's been for you. 2017. And it's not this year, it's everything that you've done up to this year in your career for your colleagues and for your students. But Jennifer's been recognized as 2017 TIES Teacher of Excellence for her leadership, not only with students, but with our staff as well. Next Thursday, Joe Haas and I are going to be at Treasure Island, recognizing Jennifer as she's being recognized by the Chamber as Educator of the Year. And a couple of words that were written in her nomination that really stand out about her is integrity, honesty, ethics, and then for me it was that your passion and commitment to build relationships for our students for individual growth. To me that said a lot about that's what we want from all of our teachers at Hastings. So congratulations, very well deserved. I know you're very humble, but it's very well deserved and we appreciate it. Yeah. And if you would like to say something, you can.
I'll be brief. Thank you very much to the Chamber for this recognition. I can think of many people who are deserving of that recognition. And I was talking to my kids on the way over here about what to say. My daughter Julia, 10th grader at Hastings High School, and my son Aaron, otherwise known as Rarin, who is a 7th grader here at Hastings Middle School, also a proud member of the Hastings High School Alpine Ski Team, and also a proud member of the Hastings High School Show Choir. Todd and I moved here and made a decision to raise a family here about 23 years ago, largely in part because I had student taught at Hastings Middle School and Hastings High School, and I fell in love. I fell in love with the teaching staff. I fell in love with people's desire to form connections with students. And I wanted that. I wanted to be a part of that. I felt passionate about that. I wanted that for my children. And I am so blessed that they have been able to receive the really wonderful things that Hastings has to offer and their teachers have to offer. And I really feel strongly that when the chamber takes time to recognize one teacher, that they're really honestly recognizing all teachers. So I appreciate that. Thank you.
Past tradition has been that the recipient afterwards is paid for a round of happy hour, but you decide.
My two are wondering when the check
Okay.
shows up.
To pay for all those activities that they're so
Yes, yes.
actively engaged with.
Under the superintendent's report tonight, later on in the board agenda, you'll be making a motion to approve our pay equity, and Kim's going to do a walkthrough of our pay equity and how that ties to our submission. And again, want to give Kim tremendous credit because before her getting here, Hastings was not very diligent in the process of pay equity comp worth, and it's through her leadership that we've turned that around. So with that, I'll let Kim walk us through the pay equity and the compliance report, et cetera. So Kim?
Okay, so I'm going to give you a quick overview of pay equity, and then I'll go through the three parts of the report that we have to submit. So pay equity is also referred to as comparable worth, and it dates back to the 1980s. School districts were required to comply and report in the early 90s. We have to submit a pay equity report to the state of Minnesota every 3 years. Pay equity is analyzing equitable compensation and comparable work value. And the purpose is to determine if compensation for comparable work value of female-dominated job classes are consistently below the compensation for comparable work value of male-dominated classes. And comparable work value is the value of work measured by skill, effort, responsibility, and working conditions that are normally required for the job. And pay equity can kind of be an emotional subject. And what we all have to keep in mind is that we're reviewing and giving point value to the job itself, not to the employees that are working within the job. And non-compliance results in a penalty of $100 per day or 5% reduction of our state aid, whichever is larger. So it's something that we have to do. All jobs that are an average of 14 hours per week and 67 days have to be reported for pay equity. And in 2007, we hired Bjorklund Compensation Consultant to do a classification study and a compensation study. And the purpose was so that we would be compliant and stay compliant with the pay equity reporting. And what they did for that study was they took all of our positions, they assessed them, they put them in job classifications, they rated the gradings then of the classifications, they did corresponding job descriptions for all our job classifications, and then they also did a market salary survey. Pay equity is equity within our district, but we also want to be equitable to the market too, to keep employees. And then they designed a new pay plan that was both internally equitable and competitive to the outside market. And all of this information and more detailed information, if you want to get into, you go to our district's website, and under Department and Services, Human Resources, and then comparable worth on the left-hand side. So first of all, down here you'll see a classification list. That lists all of our job classifications with the grade and the point value for the job. And then up here on the left are all the job descriptions that relate to those classifications. We also have on here the notices that we complied within the years that we had to report. And then there's also 2 guides out here. One is Guide to Understanding Pay Equity, and then there's one on Instructions to Completing. So when it gets into the test results, you can go to these guides and have a better understanding of the tests. And then at the bottom of this page is a PowerPoint. And this actually explains when we did the classification study, everything that was involved and how it was done. Okay, so you guys were given a report in your drop-down box. Okay, so the first page of the report, it basically just says who we are when we're reporting to the state. Then on the left-hand side, they want to know what kind of consultant system that we're using. And we use the classification matrix system. The second question they want to know is if your health contributions are different for different groups of people, you have to include that in the pay equity calculation, and ours is different. They also then want to know what our total payroll was, and it's for a calendar year. We're reporting on calendar year 2017 is what we're reporting on. And then number 3, we have to post notices, so they want to know if we posted them and where we posted them. And then they want to know if the report was approved by the board, and then it's signed off by the board chair. So then the 3 parts of it will go to, we'll skip the compliance report right now, and we'll go to the job class data entry. So this is where it all starts. We list all of our jobs. We have to list how many are males in that job, how many are females. The software then will calculate whether it's female-dominated, male-dominated, or balanced. And then we enter the job points that come off of that classification list with the job points. And then for minimum and maximum salaries, we have to convert everything to a monthly salary as if you were full-time, so that it's comparable across the jobs. So for most of these jobs at the beginning here, we have an actual salary schedule. So for the minimum, we take step 1 and multiply that by 173.33, and that's the minimum monthly salary of somebody that would be full-time. And then for the maximum salary, we take this hourly rate on step 13 and multiply that by 173.33. And then we have to take the health insurance and convert that to a monthly amount and add to that max salary. And so for health insurance, we have to put the contribution to the family amount on here, because at any time during the year, somebody can change from no insurance to single, or change from single to family, or backwards. So by their instructions, what it is what they're eligible for, not necessarily what they're currently taking. And then we do have a few groups that they get no contribution towards health insurance. And if they don't get a contribution because they don't qualify, we put 0 in there. If they qualify for a contribution, we have to put the contribution amount. So the example is the first group are cook's assistants. They all work more than 14 hours a week, which is, we have to then report them for pay equity. But to get a contribution for insurance in the district, you have to work 20 hours. So that's a group that you will see that their maximum salary looks lower than everybody else's because of that. The second thing that we have to do, if we have any 2-tiered pay systems, we have to report each group as a separate line. And one of the examples for that is we have a number 2 as a cook, and number 5 is a cook grandfathered. When we did the pay equity study back in 2007, the current cooks were graded on grade 4, but it was agreed to pay them off grade 5. And any new cooks coming in are paid off grade 4 where it was classified at. Another example is the non-public LPNs and RNs. There's a couple different things, they're paid an hourly rate. They have no salary schedule. Their hourly rate is actually paid more because they don't have health insurance. Even if they would be able to have health insurance, they don't work enough hours to qualify for any contribution anyway. And then there is the ABE teaching assistants. Right now, that's a vacant position, but if you have anybody that was in that position at any time during 2017, you have to report the last people that were in that position. And then if it's vacant and you're never going to have anybody else in that position, then you get it eliminated, which we did. And the other thing that can be a little bit different is there's a couple positions, and one is number 50, the network administrator, and then the SAC program coordinator beneath it. The network administrator, when they did this study, they did an adjustment because of market. It's basically technology is a position that they felt that it should be paid a higher grade. So you put the points in for the grade that they were graded at, and then the minimum and max at the grade that you're paying them at. So those are some of the differences that you will see. So basically, what's part of pay equity is the salary and the health insurance contribution. What is not part of pay equity is dental contribution, life insurance, LTD, paid days off, retiree health or severance, and 403B matches. None of that is included in pay equity. So then this report feeds into the next report, which is the predicted pay report. And I'm going to skip the chart for right now and just go to the report. So it basically feeds in all your jobs, the number of male, female, the job points, and then the maximum salary. And then what this does is it draws a circle around every job, and it has to go 185 points below, 185 points above, and there has to be 3 male jobs within that circle. If there isn't 3 male jobs, then you have to take it out another 92 points each way. And then the software will calculate what they think the predicted pay should be, and so then the very right-hand column is the pay difference over or under. And then the key thing to remember about this report is it's actually a mirror or a reflection of your current compensation packages or practices for male classes. It's not what you should be paying any employee at any point in here. And so then if you look at the cook's assistants and it looks like they're way underpaid, that part is because they don't qualify for any health insurance, so there's no health insurance there. If you go to the ABE assistant, the LPN non-public, and the RN non-public, you're going to see the same thing, and it's all related to they don't qualify for health insurance. So that isn't on their amount. And then for adjusted for market, you can see a difference between the network administrator and the SAC program coordinator, and that's related to the adjustment for market. And so then when you go back up to the chart, where you want to be is you want all jobs to line up right on the predicted pay job line. And you can see some jobs are over and some jobs are under. And so then what the tests look at to determine if you pass pay equity is how much over or under are they. So then all of this information feeds into what's called the compliance report. And so at the top, it just tells you all the number of male classes, number of employees in there. And so then the latter part of it is there's actually 3 tests that we need to pass to comply with pay equity. And under the statistical analysis test, you can pass under either the underpayment ratio or the t-test result. So for the underpayment ratio, what it does is it takes all the male classes below and divides it by the total classes and gets a percentage, the 35.29. And then it takes all of the female classes below pay and divides by the number of classes they have, and you get the 51.06. And then it divides the 35.29 by the 51.06. And so then this number up here to pass needs to be 80% or more. And if you don't have 80% or more, then you go down to the t-test result. And what that does is that looks at how many people are in those classes and how much are they over or under. Is it $1? Is it $1,000? And for that test, we have, this value of t here has to be less than 1.645 to pass, and we have a negative number, so we pass the statistical analysis based on the t-test results. Then the second test that we have to pass is the salary range test, and what they're trying to make sure of is that female jobs don't have more steps to the top than male jobs. And to pass that test, you have to it has to equal to either 0% or 80% or more. So we pass that test. It's 98.27. And then the third test that you have to pass is called exceptional pay. How many classes have longevity pay or performance pay? And they're looking at the same thing. Do more males have those types of pay than females? And to pass that test, that's also either 0% or 80% or more. And we pass that test. So this will all be submitted to the state of Minnesota. They take it, they look for errors, they compare it to your prior reporting if there's, the same jobs. And then if they have no questions on it, then we'll get the certificate that we passed, the pay equity. So, unless you have any questions.
What's the timeline to get confirmation from the state about?
I would say we know within a couple months we get that certificate. I don't know if those certificates out there were dated. Oh, it's more than a month though. So this one we got on June 5th, 2015, and we would have reported that January of 2015 on that. Yeah.
Okay. When do you expect?
Another thing that Kim has done and that you as a board will do is we make sure that we review all of our jobs as far as their responsibilities and their grading and their classification. So every year we will bring 25% of those jobs to you, and we'll also put out an email to them to see if any of those positions feel like they've had major change in their responsibilities. And then we send that off to a firm so that Kim and I or Deanna aren't determining where they fall. So for example, if we have Secretary 1, Secretary 2, and Secretary 3, if it's a year where the secretaries are in 25% of those jobs, we'll ask them, do any of you feel that your jobs or duties or responsibilities have changed dramatically in order to go to a different qualification? If they do, they submit it to Deanna and Kim and I. We then submit it to an outside firm so that that firm judges if it determines to be reclassified. And I think that's best for the district so that we're removed from then determining that classification. Thank you, Kim. And as you can tell, there's a lot of work that goes in to that report. And later on in part of my presentation, I'll talk about how the salary schedule for the non-certified or the hourly ties into part of what she presented. The next thing to review, and I'm not going to have it up on the screen, but I gave you a copy. It ties into ties and what's happening with ties. If any of you have been reading again, it's been on NPR, it's been in the paper again. Ties continues to have a downward spiral financially. People feel that as a business model, it's starting to go under. We switched to Infinite Campus a year and a half ago. Other school districts now are switching. We switched to Smart Finance 12 years ago as our business finance. We went to a different web design. Other schools now are doing the same thing. So what happens is when all these other schools are going to these different vendors, then it's taking money away from ties. 42 school districts in the state of Minnesota formed back in about 1960, 65 to create ties. Part of it was that if you could bundle purchasing for technology, if you could bundle ideas, you would get better services, better price points, et cetera. But in the age of technology, other vendors can come in and compete with them very well. So ties right now for the 42 member districts is roughly probably $13 million in the red. And so this was a letter then, so part of our discussion as a ties member organization on January 24th, there'll be a vote. All 42 school districts have 2 votes, so Missy Williams will go with me and we'll vote whether to dissolve. And then it'll get into how long does a dissolving take when you're into other contracts and when you need to get off of their information systems. It will be let's band together and who wants to band together. And now a third option has come in where Infinite Campus sent a letter to every school district saying that they would take over all owed liabilities and assets. Basically saying you can walk. Ty's executive committee is meeting with the owner of Infinite Campus. A very generous offer from Infinite Campus. I believe as a business person, he believes that he doesn't need the building because he already has a building for Infinite Campus. He doesn't need a CFO for finances, he already has one. He doesn't need a chief officer for technology, he already has one. So that he can absorb all of that, and because he's saved school districts a lot of money, for example, Hastings would probably owe roughly around $300,000. We probably have owed $100,000 of that anyway because as Ties made reinvestments to their facilities, we were going to owe that amount anyway. Just as we're a member of 917, tomorrow I'm going to a meeting up at 917 and they're talking about building another building for high-need, special needs students. We then owe long-term for that, just like we owe long-term for Ties. So on January 24th, I'm going to know more. What I have in front of me and what you have in front of you, if this says what it means, that when an individual in a company says that they're going to take over your assets and your liabilities and you can walk, that's a very good deal, and I'll find out, but I know how I'm going to vote. And, you know, one of my goals this year was what are we going to do life after Ties? Missy and I, we've been talking about that. We've already been talking, Kim's been involved with where would we get our internet from? Would it be more expensive, et cetera? So we've been in contact with a lot of those vendors so that we'll be able to transition if the dissolving of Ties takes place. Right now we have basically 3 products on Ties. We used to have about 5 to 6. Some districts, and they're the larger districts, Burnsville, Osseo, Anoka, they have up to 8 to 10 products on Ties. And they have some of the big products that are tough to transition away from, and that's the business finance and the student information. Parents don't get upset if attendance is maybe off, but if you don't get your paycheck on time on the business finance side, and there can be lots of problems when you transition to that. So those school districts are very leery about how fast we dissolve. The smaller school districts, which are a majority of Ties, they want it to dissolve faster. Because what's happening now is Ties is having to pay people more money to get them to stay. Because if all of you work for Ties, you'd be starting to look for a job and they're gonna have to come up to you and say, I'll pay you $30,000 extra just to stay to help us out. Well, that's gonna raise the cost. So I'll know more on January 24th. As a district, Hastings, we're in a much better position to transition away from Ties. I believe that even after Ties dissolves, there will be something like Ties. There will still be coordinator meetings. There will still be some bulk purchasing, whether it be through another consortium or Infinite Campus. So, any questions about that? All right. Just want to give you a quick update on special education aid. You know, this is my 25th year of being a superintendent, and special education aid has continued to transition. Kim probably knows this better than me, but in the last 3 years, there's been 3 different formulas that the state of Minnesota has put out on special education aid, and you're always trying to calculate it and get your money a year later. So last year, school ends on June 30th. Us and the other 327 school districts, we submit, our costs for special education, but at the same time, we're waiting for 917 and other tuition agreements that we have students throughout the state of Minnesota for them to submit it as well. Well, by August or September, we're already in our audit trying to project what our aid is going to be for the following year, not even knowing what we're getting from the state of Minnesota in that year. In the state of Minnesota's defense, they're waiting for all bills to come in from districts, and they're waiting for tuition agreement payments to come in from other districts, and they're going to get that about 8 months later. Well, now it's about 8 months later, and so now they tell us, well, the formula that we told you to base it off of, we're not going to pay it 100% now. Now we're going to pay it 96%. So that for a district our size and with our costs, that's like $184,000 loss of what projections are. So we'll get $184,000 less in aid this year for something that happened last year. And then Kim and I will be trying to bring projections to you in July or August. And so do we make that projection based off of 96%? Or do we believe that the state of Minnesota will then adjust the proration another year? My belief is that the state of Minnesota, when they changed their formula for special education aid, they had inaccurate guesstimates of what those costs were going to be and what those aid payments were going to be, and now they can't sustain it. So my belief is that the state of Minnesota is going to have to keep lowering that proration aid in years to come, which then will mean a drop off of aid to school districts for years to come. Now, Kim and I are still waiting for sure what are those tuition agreements coming in from other districts, as we have to place students in other school districts and other settings. And so it might not be a full $184,000 loss, because maybe those tuition agreements from those other school districts aren't as large as they were in other years. So again, as a board, I just want to outline to you some of the continued difficulties and frustrations with the changing of the formulas and they can just keep adjusting. And I get it, they have to adjust, they don't have the money to pay it. Because they based it off of a set, legislatively, they said this is going to be the pile of money, and they were wrong on it. So now they have to prorate it. Any questions on that? Facility committee update, and the facility committee members, they can join in as well. Russ and Peter and Joe and I met Monday, was it Monday? Yeah, Monday with Wold. Probably for about 2.5 hours after that meeting. I went over in the evening, and then I walked Tilden as part of the discussion with them too for the security entrances at Tilden. I wanted them to walk it before they talked to Carrie Gore. That's been our most difficult site in the district to get security to, because we have a blending of early childhood programs that have more of an ebb and flow of our other sites, coming and going more often. And then it's intermixed with heavy adult usage as well. The night that we went over there, pickleball's going on, poker's going on, interactive bowling's going on, and the door's wide open and the lights are on, and there's, I mean, it's fine until something happens. So I want to get to a point at Tilden where we have, you can swipe in if you're a senior and you can go play pickleball. You can swipe in if you're a senior and you can go play poker. But then I want part of the facility locked down so that they can only stay in their site. And it's not that I'm worried about them. I'm worried about the junior high student who comes in and is skateboarding down the hallway and doing other things. And so we walked over there to take a closer look at that. A lot of our discussion with Joe, Russ, and Peter were two main things of the, I'd say three main things. The high school roof. The high school roof's going to be at least a 2-year project, maybe a 3-year project for a couple of reasons. Number one, it's a massive roof. When you rebuild a roof, it's different than when you originally do, because now you have to tear it down and build it back up. When the high school was originally built, they just built the roof. So we looked at some of the cost estimates of that. We definitely want a 30-year roof on there. We want better insulation on there. So we talked about, that project at length. And they went through some details on that project with that and some cost estimates. Then we talked about the middle school reinvestment, which is a huge project. And again, we talked about the timing of, will that be a 3-summer project? Will that be a 2-summer project with contractors on site during the school year? Can it occur, et cetera? Both Mark and Joe have done a ton of legwork on that project already. Joe Haas was here and presented along with Wold on how that could work, et cetera. The plan on that is to, at our March work session, typically we go out to all the sites on our work sessions, and we'd already done a middle school stop. We're going to come back here because I want all the board members to walk the middle school site and some of the things that Joe Haas and Mark are thinking on how that could occur. We talked about whether or not in our bids are we going to require that all contractors on the middle school site have background checks. We talked about where they would entrance, where we'd clear out parking lots so that they only park in one area and they only enter in one area. So we talked about all those things. Board members said that yes, any contractor on site at the middle school does need to have a background check. We want it written into the bid documents. We also want a process where we see those documents, and we only give out passes for those people to enter once they have passed that background check. So what'll happen on March 7th, you as an entire board will get you'll walk the middle school site with Joe or Mark, and we'll talk about some of the potential movements. Then we'll come back here and we'll talk about 4 or 5 components that we're looking on that. I'm going to need then some head nods after that work session on what our thoughts are about 3 summers, which is more expensive than 2 summers and during the school year, because we're going to have to bid it according to one of those 2 philosophies. After that work session, and you give me direction on how we're going to do that, Wold will start the bid process, and then we will communicate with mainly our middle school staff first, and then we'll communicate with the public on that. And at that meeting on March 7th, you'll see the phase-in plan of all the projects. So for example, we're not going to do the parking lot up in the high school athletic complex until we do Todd Field. Todd Field's not going to be done until the spring of 2019, in the summer of 2019. Some of those things then, we're already moving our lacrosse games in the spring of 2019. We're already moving some of our football games in the fall of 2019. We know that means that graduation probably will be indoors, because Todd Field will be under construction in April and May of that year. And so you'll hear more about that phasing in and why we plan to phase it in. And then again, we'll keep coming back to the facility committee. One of the questions for you as a board is going to be, Wold wants to know that as they do plan design, for example, on the high school roof, and that it has to be a 4-ply, will the facility committee board members, Joe, Russ, and Peter, and myself, have the authority to give them to move forward in that design? So the rest of you won't be involved in what is the R value of the insulation, what is the slope on it, what is the quality of the ply being put down. Because if it has to come back to you as a full board, then they're going to change their timeline. They said typically it doesn't. It goes through the facility committee and the superintendent to say, yeah, bid it this way. Then the bids come back to you as a full board. So that's something to be thinking about for the March board meeting. And one of the good, I shared one of the good news items that we found on Todd Field was, is the infrastructure there for the technology? So as we look to do improved Wi-Fi for our coaches' boxes, Wi-Fi for the lights being able to be remotely turned on by your phone, the ability to have Wi-Fi on our phones to open in the doors to let youth soccer and youth football in. That infrastructure is all right where we need it to be. It's not 500 feet away. It's not 1,000 feet away. It's going to be close, so that's going to help with our costs there as well. And then it was also shared There's already been a meeting with Deanna, all of our site principals, as we look to add $300,000 to $400,000 worth of safety cameras. Our main focus right away is the high school site. Middle school, we're purchasing, but we realize that as the middle school goes under construction, we're going to have to wait for some of the implementation of that. So that's a quick update. We plan as a facility committee meeting once a month here to keep us on track and get us going into the bid process. Russ and Peter and Joe, is there anything else that I?
Just that, so far they've been able to answer most of our questions in a good way. A lot of the concerns that I had, they were able to address around safety and, air quality within the school, things like that. So far, we're hearing the right answers.
They sent me today a list of 6 schools within a 50-mile radius of us that have changed their locker room shower design. So it's not the, for lack of a better term, the gang shower mentality. That's what they call it.
Let's come up with a better term.
Well, that's just all I could think of. And so how we can design that at the middle school site, how we can design that at the high school site, not only for transgender issues as we deal with them right now as we deal with them in the foreseeable years, but also just for more privacy for all of our students and student athletes as they use those locker rooms. What I'll do on that is we're going to go out and tour some of those sites. We're also touring for flexible furniture, some flexible design space. What I'll do is I'll send you an email that we're going on the tour of some of these sites, and anybody who's free that day, if you want to come along and hop in and out of those schools. Shakopee is an example because they just reinvested in their high school site as one that for the locker rooms and showers. Buffalo is another school district for their locker rooms and showers. So I'll toss that email out, and anybody even outside of the facility committee can hop on that. Any other questions on that? Homeland Security, last week, Mike Johnson, Deanna, and I, and who else was on that? Paul Spiskowski, Josh McClay, Jim Huberty. We did a specific tour of the high school, and we wanted feedback, we wanted criticism, we wanted them to look at our security at our high school site. And I'll just go through some of it was about probably a 2.5 to 3 hour meeting at the high school. They gave the district overall and Hastings High School huge compliments. They felt that the ALICE training that all administrators had gone through to become ALICE certified really leapfrogged us overall as a knowledge base of security, just from a communication standpoint compared to other school districts that they've been in. They also talked about the fact with Raptor technology, electronic door system, walk-through security entrances, that we're probably in that area too, one of the lead school districts in the state of Minnesota for security. And I think we all know that on security, there's always going to be issues. You can always come up with all these what if. We're not going to be able to solve every problem. But they just outlined some of those problems, to us. One of the things that they talked about that they believe that we should highly should consider, and of course it's the improved technology as well, is that there be flashing white lights specifically at the high school, in the industrial tech areas, in the gymnasium areas. So for example, we were in the industrial tech area, saws were going, we require kids to have on, safety for their hearing, and you'd never be able to hear, that we're in a lockdown or that there's a violent intruder. They also said that on the outside of our buildings, we should also have white lights flashing. So for example, if at 7:45 in the morning, there's somebody in the neighborhood and we have to lock down our site because somebody in the neighborhood has a gun, that has happened to us where we get called by the police and we have to lock down because somebody's going to potentially do harm to themselves, that they don't want the buses then pulling up and dropping off kids when the exterior is locked down, that they don't want parents to come, that white lights would mean stay away. Now, that wouldn't just be the high school. They would recommend that at all the sites. So that was some of the things that they talked to us about. They talked about what type of system do we have with PSEO students who are away from the building, or students go to a doctor appointment, or students go to a dentist appointment, and now we're in lockdown and they're coming back. They felt that we should go to a system where electronically we could have an immediate call. Then any of those students who check out, the system would know that, so that the system goes into lockdown, then the system can automatically call them and text them as well. Traveling staff as well. They said that the traveling staff should be on that list as well, so that they're not coming to a site that is in lockdown. Of course, the after-school hours and really at the high school is it's a pickle, for lack of a better word, because you want the building open to the community, you want it used often, but then how do you go about locking down areas once they get in? And all of us in the room know you can come in that top entrance. A lot of schools, when you have a basketball game in the gymnasium, you can't then walk in and also go down the steps. You can funnel them right to the gym. Well, that's a problem for us because we have layers in that design. So they just talked about some of the things that we could consider. So in that example, they said to us, you have your ticket takers inside the gym. Maybe you should move them outside the gym so that their eyes are outside of the gym. And if they see somebody suspicious going, I don't know who looks suspicious anymore nowadays, but if they see something suspicious, or they could say, hey, are you going to the game, or where are you going? And so they just gave us some good tips on that. They felt that our key return system was weak, and what I mean by that is, coaches who might have a key, or some of our staff who might have a key to a closet somewhere or whatever, or keys, that we have a system, but it's really not automated. They talked about the fact that some school districts just go to, at the end of every year, every key gets turned back in, period. And they know because it's an electronic database and it's checked off. And they said that we should consider going to something like that. We didn't agree with this on incident command, but I'll tell you what they said. Incident command means that who's in charge when people start showing up. So we've always believed as an administrative group, and we're still going to follow this belief. They said that it's changing a little bit. We said that when the law shows up, they're in charge. A person with a gun, they're showing up, I'm letting them take over. And I'll still communicate with them. Just when we had the gun incident here, eventually Mark and I were still communicating with them. But if they tell me we're not going into a room, they're in command. So they said that that's changing a little bit as a philosophy, and we said that we're still going to follow that philosophy right now. I've asked them to, even though they're a free service, they can't get out to every school. There's only 2 to 4 of them that come in and analyze, but I've asked them to come back this spring to do our middle school site. And it's definitely, I'm starting with the high school and the middle school site, our largest sites, our sites that are used the most often. And then eventually next year we'll get into them to do a walkthrough of our elementary sites, our ALC, Tilden, et cetera. Just really a great service. It's a Minnesota-based service of Homeland Security. We didn't have to pay for it. They had read our entire manual before they got here, and that would put most of you to sleep in an instant. It's about 5 inches thick, and they had asked us questions about it. So they did their homework before they came here. So we're hoping that they can come back and do the middle school this spring, and then our elementary sites aren't as large, and so they'd be able to do a couple of them next year. Any questions on that?
How does this tie into with the role and the architects, and is this things we can do in-house, or does that have to be?
Yeah, I think definitely because of that walkthrough, and Deanna, who's in charge of our electronic door system, and Deanna, who's in charge of our camera system, and Deanna, who's in charge of getting messages out, and Mike Johnson. Now when we talk with Wold, we have some of that knowledge that we can share, maybe where we want our cameras differently. There's budgeted $800,000, $400,000 apiece for the high school and the middle school to upgrade the fire alarm system. And by doing that, the reason it's so costly is because when you upgrade the fire alarm system, you can add a speaker in every room as well, and you can add the flashing lights as well. The PA system right now at the high school, Mike just sent me an email, and Deanna an email earlier this week. It's crazy, but it's outdated. They can't get parts for it anymore, and we're going to have to replace that anyway. The fire alarm system there is about outdated, and that's part of why we budgeted $400,000. So yes, it kind of coincides with what we're doing with Wold as well. Any other questions? Then the last one, Lisa and Scott had asked and requested that I do a little presentation on negotiations philosophy. They wanted me to do that because we have 3 new board members here. Peter, you're still a new board. I don't know when you're no longer a new board member, but so they wanted me to do that. They also know that we're televised as well, so they wanted me to walk through some negotiations philosophy for people who do watch this in the community as well. So the first thing that about 2 years ago, when we started negotiations with the principals at that time, you can go to the next screen. The first thing that the board members back then had asked me, let's go through our revenue and where do we get our revenue sources from. And the number one source that we get our revenue from is from student enrollment. That money comes from the state of Minnesota, and without a doubt, that is what drives a core majority of our revenue to operate our facilities. The next thing, then, our community has been extremely generous in approving operating levies, and we thank them so much for that. And of course, that comes from the local taxpayer. It comes from the local taxpayer, but it is also based off of, student enrollment. A third one, everybody would think that this is much larger, but it's not. Special education aid, Title I are 2 examples. That comes from the federal government. Food service comes from the federal government as well, but those dollars can't go into our general fund, so I didn't put that up here. So that's a minor one. And then a fourth one would be fees and admissions. Whether you're paying to get into a basketball game, whether you're paying for your child to be in show choir or basketball or football, all those fees and admissions. So at that time, the board said to me, if the number one way that we get our money is student from the state of Minnesota, then should we not be comparing ourselves to other school districts of similar size? Because if we get our revenue that way and they get their revenue that way, then should we be comparing ourselves to South Wash, Rosemount, Apple Valley, Egan, or other schools of similar size that have to run off a similar budget? Right now, there's 327 public schools roughly in the state of Minnesota. If you start throwing in charter schools, it's way above that, but there's about 327. Hastings, based on enrollment right now, we're the 45th largest school district in the state of Minnesota on student enrollment, approximately. So the districts that we picked at that time when we started negotiating with principals at that time, 2 years ago now, Richfield, Farmington, South St. Paul, Red Wing, Inver Grove Heights, Cambridge, Isani. We threw Farmington in there, even though they're a district of about 2,000 more students than us, we still kept them in there as a base point. And when we chose those schools, we weren't saying that, well, we're going to try and get exactly like their contracts. It was, again, just to give us a comparison. Farmington, in fact, will keep moving further away from them because as we continue to have declining enrollment, we won't be moving closer to them. So we took that information, and when we met with the principals and administrators, we looked at what were other districts paying for health insurance, what the contribution was, not so much what the cost of the health insurance was, but what was the district having to pay for the health insurance. We did that same thing for dental insurance. We did it for their 403B contribution, retiree health costs, et cetera, severance costs, vacation days, sick leave. And then with administrators, there's not as much of a salary range. Administrators aren't like a teacher's contract. They're not like the non-certified contract where there's more of maybe a 12 to 13 step salary range. Administrators is probably more of a, over about a 10-year period, you probably get to the top, or an 8-year period in administrators, you get to the top depending on the district. And in the end, when we looked at all that, I think there's one more, is there? We kept saying to the administrators, yeah, I know your salary might be less than those, but your health insurance and your retiree health is $5,000 more than those. So we kept saying, what do you want as a total package? And what can we as a district give to you as a total package? We don't want you coming in here and saying to us, well, we want more dental insurance or we want more of this. We're looking at the comparison as a total package, and that's how we negotiated that contract 2 years ago. One of the things with schedule comparison, these are some of the things that we look at when we look at a schedule. You look at the starting step. So what should that salary be at a starting step to try and attract employees, whether that be a teacher, whether that be food service, whether that be a custodian, whatever that might be. That's one of the things that you as a board focus in is that first step. When you look at the teacher's contract, there's things that you can look at, but another step that you look at is typically teachers, a master's level, where are they at about 15 years from now. So that's a mid-range test point that we look at as well. Then high five is very important when looking at a salary schedule, because retirement can be based off of high five in both of those groups. So what is the power of the high five when you look at a salary schedule? And then top step, when you hear us talk about top step or bottom step is the highest price point. Bottom step is the interest. Some people, when they're looking at the schedule, they said to me, well, isn't bottom step down here? Because that's the bottom of the... So that's when we use that terminology, just so you know how we look at that. And then career earnings comes into over that salary schedule, because you're looking at not only a starting step, but you're also looking at an ending point. But then one of the powers of a salary schedule is what are the career earnings of that schedule over time. And this will typically tie into, again, the teacher's contract. It'll tie into principals, custodians, because they have a longer career earning schedule. So just to give you an example of that, when Ed Minnesota Hastings, looked at it, they look at it as a 20-year career earning. They also looked at it as a 30-year career earning. I believe that the 30-year is more applicable, because I believe that what happens in education is most people about around the age of 30, they settle in somewhere. And they probably believe that school district, then they start to raise their family, their kids are in sports, etc. And then they typically work till their retirement age, which is moving. I've shared with you as a board before, when I first came here, our staff were retiring around 57, 58. Now with the cost of living, now with the cost of health insurance, even though we offer retiree health insurance, I think our average age of people retiring now has moved to 61. So probably the career earnings over time is going to move even longer too, because people are going to work longer. But when you look at this, can you go back? Or? So when you look at the 30-year ranking, last year ranking 29th out of approximately 327th, with us being the 45th largest. I'm not going to interpret whether that's because it's always good to be number one. But so I'm not saying that that's great, but that gives you a feel for the career earnings. It's very difficult for me. I'm not smart enough mathematically to do a career earnings. I'd have to rely on, MSBA or MASA or Education Minnesota, who pays people to say, okay, you're on this step for 3 years, then you're on this step, and then you're on this step to do that career. So I rely on people to do the power of the career earning schedule. So then the school board's schedule approach, some of the things that board members have looked at over the years is, are we always going to give percentages to steps, or are we going to mix in some years where it's dollars? Because if you continue to always give percentage to steps, you're going to spread the difference between the top and the bottom. So I don't believe that you can always give a percentage to each step, or the spread's going to become too far apart. And our teacher negotiators, and I know there's many of them in here tonight, they understand that as well, but I just want to make sure that you as board members understand that. Because if a top teacher is making $70,000 and they get 2%, that's $1,400. If an entry-level teacher is $40,000 and they get 2%, that's $800. So if you would keep giving 2%, the top would keep moving further away from the bottom. So there's been years where we say, hey, we just can't do that percentage. And if you're a veteran teacher, you're saying, oh, great. If you're a veteran custodian, you're saying, oh, great. If you're a veteran food service, you're saying, oh, great. Now that person who's been here 1 year gets the same amount as me. In fact, they'll get more than me because I don't have anywhere to move. And that person's not only going to get I'll just say $500. So the food service cook's going to say to me at negotiations, oh, great, I get $500 and I got nowhere to move. And that person who's only been here 1 year gets the $500 plus they get to move. And that's some of the things that we discuss on a salary schedule. Another things that we look at, do you remove the first year step to have a more attractive pay? One of the problems in doing that is if you remove that first year step. So if Deanna was a first year custodian here and she was making $15 an hour, and we remove that first step and the next year it's $16 an hour, and now we hire Joe. Joe now is making $16 an hour, and so is Deanna. So she says, is that fair to me? I was on that first step, you removed it, and now I'm making the same as somebody who's been here less than me. And that's one of the trade-offs when you remove that first step and you want to make it more attractive for employees to come to Hastings. Another strategy is add a step to the top, because after so long, those individuals at the top, if they're getting 1% and they're not getting, step movement, typically they're not going to get in their last 3 to 4 years as much of an increase as others. So then do you add a step to the top? I tell school boards that if you're going to add a step to the top, I don't mind that, but then I want a first step removed. Because if you don't do that, then your salary schedule is eventually going to be 28, 30, 32 steps long. So I do share with board members that if you're going to add to the top, I believe you need to remove the first step so that you don't expand the length of the salary schedule. This is ties back to this is the non-certified, and I really want to emphasize some of the issues with the schedule and why we need to stay with it. So what happened was back in about 2007, I'd been negotiating contracts with the non-certified, and some of them had 18 sick leave days, some of them had 6. Some of them had 28 steps to the top, some of them had 10. Some of the groups had 6 vacation days, some had 14. And I said to them when I met with them, how did this ever happen, that there was such a spread? Well, what happens when you get with smaller bargaining groups, it's whatever the need of that group is. So let's say 15 years ago, there were 30 people in food service and none of them really needed health insurance. So they didn't bargain for health insurance because their spouse had health insurance. So they bargained for more sick leave days, they bargained for more vacation days, they bargained for other things. So as you had different groups bargaining for where they were at that point in time, everything got out of whack. We were out of compliance because some female groups it was taking 28 years to get to the top, some male groups it was taking 12 years. So in that year we sat down, that's where we paid the outside firm to put people into grade classifications, and we said that this is fair to everybody. And let me tell you, this took many, many hours to get to this, and this is why the board can never go away from this. Because if you go away from this, you're going to get out of compliance. Within about a 3 to 4 year period, you would get out of compliance. The difficulty in this is within about 2 months, I'll be sitting down with the Teamsters who represent the custodians and they represent the community at Paris. I'll be sitting down with food service, who are they with, SEIU? Yep. And then I'll sit down with our PSAs, probably about 90 members, all at different times. And then I'll say to them, what would you like? And some of them are going to say to me, well, we'd like the first step removed. Others are going to say, I don't want it removed, I want it added to the top. Some are going to say, I would like 50 cents an hour increase. Others are going to say, put more towards health insurance. And unfortunately, I have to come back and say, it all has to be pretty close to the same. We, as a district, we can't honor your request. And then we don't, it's the same amount of money as the custodians, it's just placed in different places. Well, we can't do that. So again, as we head into that negotiations, those are some of the things that we'll be looking at and we'll be talking about, but that's what makes it difficult when we get to their level of negotiation, because they come from many different groups, but they have to stay to the same schedule. This is just fictitious to give you an example of, these numbers aren't accurate, I just made them up, but it gives you a scenario of what happens like when I sit down with the custodians. The custodians will say to me, Tim, you're offering us 2.2% in salary, but Red Wing custodians, they're offering 3.5%. And I'll say back to them, well, first of all, tell me, where's that percentage that you're hearing? Is that new money to the schedule, or is that money and step movement? Because I don't know what it means. So let's first of all look at what that means. Let's get that common language about what does percentage actually mean. Then I'll say to them, yes, I realize that we're only offering 2.2% in salary to you, but you get more health than them, you get more 403B match than them, the starting wage is different, and oh, by the way, they have a higher percentage of their people that are on step 1 or 2. So when they're giving that 3%, even if it is equal to us, it's not costing them as much because they're giving it to people that are on a lower step than us. So I talk to them about when we look at it all, it is what is the total package overall. It's not just salary that you're looking at, or it's not just health insurance that you're looking at, or retiree health. We have to sit down and talk about what is that total package compared to our comparable school districts. Any questions from board members on some of those philosophical approaches as we go through negotiations? All right. And I don't know, Lisa and Scott, if that, I never reviewed that with you, but I know you'd asked me to put something together, and you can tell me later whether I met your intent.
Well, Scott and I'll come up with something at the end and say, but I want to say, I know my takeaway from that was just the reminder about the link to compliance and pay compliance, and that it's not necessarily consistency for consistency's sake. It's about having a fair and equitable workplace across gender. And well, we have a lot of groups that are relatively small, or maybe even one, and it's just important to keep that in mind. And I know that tends to, because we only look at the pay compliance every 3 years, that's not always at the top of my mind, personally. All right, we are ready to hit the action item portion of our agenda. I hope everybody has their motion and second voices ready. Take a little sip of water. Our first action item tonight is a motion to approve a resolution directing the administration to make recommendations, if necessary, for reductions in programs, positions, and reasons therefore. The complete resolution was provided as action item 1. Could I get a motion and a second?
Make the motion.
Second.
All right, thank you. Is there any discussion?
I just want to share with board members again, every year by law, every school district has to make this resolution, because the only way that I or principals can bring forth to you any recommended reductions is if you have given us direction to do so. And so this is giving the direction. And I tell every board member that the reason it's also good to do is we never, sometimes you're not even telling us to make reductions, but just due to lack of students, let's say in kindergarten, we might have to reduce somebody, so then by law, we've met the law because we can reduce in that area. So even though you've not given us direction to cut 500,000 or 750,000, or sometimes we still have to make that reduction without you doing so.
Is there any further discussion from board members?
Roll call vote.
Roll call vote.
Joe Becker,
Yes?
Peter Bussenbach,
Yes.
Scott Gergen,
Yes.
Lisa Hadeen,
Yes.
Dave Pemble,
Yes.
Russ Roloff, yes. Nancy Watts. Superintendent Collins shouldn't be on here.
Right.
You don't get to vote. All right. Next, we have a motion to approve the school board committee structure for 2018. Did I get a motion and a second?
So move.
Second.
Thank you. For purposes of discussion, I just want to say this is a carry out from our organizational meeting earlier in January. Rather than having to make sausage at the table and put together the committee structure, I appreciate everybody giving me their thoughts and perspectives, and I sent a draft back out and got feedback, and Deanna finalized that. If this doesn't work, we'll adjust. If we need a different committee, we'll make one. But this gives us a guideline, it gives us a sense. If somebody feels that they're getting caught up in a lot of activity, because I know facility will be very busy, we're going to have a fair amount of joint powers, I expect we'll have a fair amount of finance. Let's just stay in communication as a group, okay? I don't want anybody to feel like they're just getting too far behind the 8 ball on this. And I just really appreciate how willing everybody was to serve across the board. That was great. Is there any other discussion on the specifics of our assignments? All right. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. Motion carries. I would now like a motion and a second to approve the 2018 pay equity report for Independent School District number 200. This is the report that Kim provided earlier in our meeting.
I'll motion.
Second.
Thank you. Is there any discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. Motion carries. Our fourth action item tonight is a motion to approve the revised joint powers agreement between Hastings Public Schools and the Independent Schools District of Region 5. Could I get a motion in a second?
So move. Second.
Thank you. Discussion?
Yeah, the only,
Information.
there's new leadership it's just like us being in joint powers with the city of Hastings. It's like us being joint powers or entering into an agreement with ties. There's new leadership now at Region 5. There's been a transition, and they hadn't updated their joint powers agreement in 20 years.
Yeah, I did notice the dates.
So they made some very minor changes that don't impact the intent of the agreement. So Kim and I are recommending your approval.
Any discussion from the board? All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. Motion carries. Our fifth action item is a motion to approve the revised joint powers agreement between Hastings Public Schools and the City of Hastings. Could I get a motion in a second?
I do need to hop in on this.
Okay.
Because this was just happening in the last 24 hours. It doesn't change the intent, but if you look at, there's two agreements with the city of Hastings on joint powers. The first one is more of a core philosophy overall, that we should work together, that we're going to meet so often, who gets to be on the committee. The second one is saying that we are going to enter into an agreement with the senior center. So this is the first one. And the slight changes since I gave it to you is if you look up there, it had said January 30th. Our agreement with the senior center is January 1st, so I thought they should match. And again, I don't think when we forward this to the city that they're going to argue with these changes. The other thing is in the body of funding of the projects, this language ties way back to when joint powers first started 25 years ago, that all things would be funded 70-30. We've never done that over the last 25 years. So for example, we share a sign down by the Todd Field, it's 50-50. We entered into an agreement with the joint maintenance facility right over here, it's 55-45, and then it's 50-50 of ongoing costs. So we have all these different agreements with different arrangements. The recommendation is to just in red, instead of saying 70%, say, these projects will be funded per agreement, instead of saying the 70%, 30%. And so, those are the recommended, changes to it, other than what you saw. So I'd recommend approval of that.
Okay, to be clear on this one then, are you proposing striking the 70%?
Yes, the red means we're gonna strike it. Because it
The
wasn't.
underlined red is gonna
Right,
be struck.
they
Okay,
sent the document, so we couldn't get it to underline, so we just read
Okay.
it, we just put it in red.
okay.
But yeah, that needs to be gone, and just say, these projects will be done per agreement.
In Article 2, shouldn't there be 3 school board members and 3 council members instead of 2? Since I've been on it, it's been like that.
I don't
We
even
have our-
have that.
I
We
have
can
it
do
up,
that.
I have it up right here. We have
We
an
can do that
alternate
based-
listed.
We can do that based upon your,
Our alternate still
I
attends
remember
the
we
meeting.
discussed that at the meeting.
so say it again, what you would change it to?
There was 3 of us, three school board members at the meeting, there was 3 council members at the meeting.
I'd go with that recommendation.
Yeah.
And then you strike the one alternate.
Yeah,
So right now it says 2 and then 1 alternate.
so we'll go with 3 and then strike the alternate.
Yeah, same for the city.
Yeah,
And they could just designate all of them as council members. So if there's any feedback from the city on that that's different, then we'll
We'll- at our
revisit
next-
this
yes,
again?
yep.
Okay.
and I
the-
don't think there will be. They've been very good to work on this part of the joint powers agreement.
Okay, so just to be clear, the motion is to approve this revision from our perspective, and it may well come back
Yep.
to the board if there's
Tweaking.
tweaking to be done or slight variations once the wording comes back from the city. Is there any further discussion?
I don't think we motioned, did we? No.
Oh, that's right, I was interrupted prior to the
I'll
motion.
motion.
Thank you. Second?
Second, with all the changes.
Okay, with the changes in green and red. Okay. Dave has a second. Further discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. Motion carries. They're gonna move on to the next motion, which is the second part that Tim alluded to, which is a motion to approve the revised joint powers agreement between Hastings Public Schools and the City of Hastings for the Hastings Senior Center program. Could I get a motion and a second?
I'll motion.
Thank you. Is there any discussion on this item?
It follows right what we've been doing ever since I've been here, and that's a
Yeah.
50/50 sharing of the costs, basically of the coordinator position, with the acknowledgement that the seniors do fundraising, they pay for many other items there as
Yeah.
well.
It's their in-kind service. It's quite
Yes,
large.
I mean, if there's any project and we need money there, they say how much and they fundraise, so it reflects what we've been doing for 15 years.
Is there any further discussion from the board? All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. Motion carries. Our seventh action item tonight is a motion to approve the retirement of one individual. Linda Featherstone Cook from the middle school. Could I get a motion and a second?
So moved.
Second.
Any discussion?
Some quick math on this one. 26 years of making lunches at the middle school is directionally about 4,500 lunches made.
Oh my gosh.
That's
I'm
staggering.
gonna trust your order of magnitude. That's
staggering.
amazing. That's amazing. Yeah, and I think it's important to recognize just the commitment and the connection that is to the students and the community. That's, I'm almost gonna have to mull that number tonight. Wow. I get a little frustrated about my 10 lunches a week I have to
One.
prepare. All right. Is there any further discussion? Did we get a motion in a second? I'm losing
We
track.
did.
Yeah, we
Thank
did.
you.
We're waiting for vote.
All right. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. Motion carries. Our eighth action item is a motion to approve leaves for 4 individuals. Could I get a motion in a second?
Motion.
Second.
Thank you. Is there any discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. Ninth action item, a motion to accept the resignation of 3 individuals. Could I get a motion in a second?
So moved.
Second.
there any discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Pose same sign. Motion carries. Our 10th item is a motion to approve change in assignment for 2 different people. Could I get a motion and a second?
Motion.
Second.
Thank you. Is there any discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Pose same sign. And our last action item for the evening is a motion to approve the employment of 5 new people in the district. Could I get a motion and a second?
Motion.
Second.
Thank you. Is there any discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. Motion carries. Under other business, we have a few meetings coming up. Work session on the 7th of February.
That will be at Pinecrest Elementary.
Okay, thank you. That was gonna be my question. The high school lunch,
We just had that
We just had
yesterday,
this.
and when we do that, board members will be buying this time.
oh, I got off that
Yeah,
committee
you
just
did.
in time.
Yeah.
That was a close call. Figured I'd have to pack lunch for those people too. Okay, that's on the 20th of February. And then our next regularly scheduled board meeting is on the 21st. I see here, the time is typed in at 6:30. In real life, it'll be 6 o'clock.
It'll be 6, yeah.
So don't be late. Is there anything else under other business that
no.
anybody's aware of?
Do we want to say a word about our 2 students who were involved in saving a life this past week?
I
I
think
don't-
we would. Who's ready to go?
Cindy
Who's ready
Radke
to
and
go?
Addie Buck, yeah.
There'll be a commendation from the city, so,
Yeah, we'll maybe invite them to
yeah,
our
then that maybe
next
can be
school board meeting as well.
a good news story.
Some fast thinking.
Extend that.
Yes.
Anything else? All right, thank you. Could I get a motion and a second to adjourn?
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Pose same sign. Motion carries. Thank you. I was a little afraid that motion to adjourn was gonna die for lack of a second. I just thought we might have to continue. Thanks, everybody. Thanks all you guys for attending, and hanging out. Appreciate it. Do I wanna close all tabs? Yes, I do.